What if I told you that the worst thing that ever happened to you never actually touched you? Not the loss, not the betrayal, not the night you thought you wouldn't survive. There is something inside you that has never been scratched, never been burned, never been broken. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what it is and why that knowledge changes everything. You're exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives in your bones. You've been through something, maybe more than one something, and people keep telling you how strong you are. But here's what they don't see. You're not strong, you're confused, because part of you should be destroyed by now. By every logical measure, you should be broken beyond repair. But you're not. You're still here, still breathing, still watching this. And the thing that quietly terrifies you more than the pain itself is that you don't understand why you're still standing. Something inside you refuses to collapse. You didn't ask it to keep going. You didn't give it permission. It just won't stop. You've smiled at someone today or yesterday, and they had no idea that behind that smile, you were keeping yourself from drowning. You've answered, "I'm fine," so many times the words have lost all meaning. They're just sounds now, a password to get through conversations. There's a reason you haven't broken, and it's 5,000 years old. His name was Neil, 33 years old, software architect, the kind of guy who always had a plan for his career, his weekends, his retirement, spreadsheets for everything, a 5-year timeline pinned above his desk. 8 months ago, his younger sister Tara died in a car accident. She had called him that evening, asked if he could pick her up from a friend's place. He was in the middle of a client presentation. He said, "Take a cab, I'll see you at home." She never made it home. After Tara's death, things didn't just fall apart, they disintegrated. His wife tried, she really tried, but Neil had gone somewhere she couldn't reach, a place behind his own eyes where he replayed that phone call on an endless loop. Take a cab. 2 words, the last 2 words he ever said to his sister. The marriage ended quietly, no screaming, no slamming doors, just a suitcase by the hallway, a silence that filled every room, and the soft click of a door shutting for the last time. Then his company restructured. He was let go, not because he wasn't talented, but because he had become a ghost, showing up at his desk but never really there. His manager called it performance issues. Neil knew the real word for it: grief. Now he sat on the floor of a half-empty apartment in a city that no longer felt like his. No sister, no wife, no job. Boxes stacked against the wall that he hadn't unpacked, because unpacking would mean admitting this was his life now. And the question that kept circling his mind like a vulture over something not yet dead wasn't, "Why did this happen?" It was worse than that. It was, "Why hasn't this killed me yet? What part of me is still alive, and how do I make it stop?" The knock came on a Sunday morning. Neil almost didn't answer. He assumed it was a delivery or a neighbor or someone he'd have to perform normalcy for. That exhausting act of pretending to be a person who was fine. But when he opened the door, he found a 70-year-old woman in a cotton sari, holding a steel tiffin carrier, looking at him the way only someone who has known you since childhood can. Kamala Auntie, Tara's old Carnatic music teacher. The woman who had spent 12 years trying to teach his sister to hold a note without laughing halfway through. The woman Tara called every single Diwali before she called anyone else. She didn't say sorry. She didn't tilt her head with that careful angle of pity he had learned to dread. She walked in, looked around the apartment. the unwashed dishes piled in the sink, the curtains drawn tight against the daylight, the man standing in yesterday's clothes with last week's eyes, and simply said, "Sit, eat, then we talk." He didn't have the energy to argue. She let him eat in silence. She didn't rush him. She didn't fill the air with platitudes or well-meaning stories about how time heals everything. She simply sat across from him at the small kitchen table and waited, as though she had nowhere else in the world to be. When he finally pushed the empty plate away, she spoke. "You think you are broken?" Neil didn't answer. He didn't need to. The apartment answered for him. Tara used to say something to me when she cracked a note during practice. She'd get so frustrated with herself, and I would tell her, "The note is not broken. Your throat is simply learning where to place it. The sound itself, it cannot be damaged. It exists whether you sing it perfectly or not." She paused, and then she looked directly at him, not with pity, not with sympathy, but with something fiercer, something that looked almost like certainty. "Neil, listen to me carefully. What happened to Tara? It is the worst thing. I will not sit here and pretend it isn't. The accident, the guilt you carry over that phone call, the marriage, the job, all of it. It is real. The pain is real. But you, the thing that is aware of all this pain, the thing experiencing it right now, that has not been damaged, not even a little." Neil stared at her, and for the first time in 8 months, something shifted behind his eyes. Not understanding, not yet, but the faintest edge of it, like light under a closed door. "Auntie, everything I had is gone." She reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over his. "Everything you had, yes, but not everything you are. There is something in you that the accident could not touch, that the grief cannot burn, that the loneliness cannot dissolve, and that the winds of this world, no matter how brutal, cannot blow away. Weapons cannot cut it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot wet it, wind cannot wither it. That is not poetry, Neil. That is the oldest truth about what you actually are. You are not the things that happen to you. You are the thing that remains after everything happens." She reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a small, worn book, its spine cracked with age, its pages soft and yellowed from decades of turning. She opened it to a page marked with a faded red thread. "Your sister loved these verses. She used to sing them like a raga." Now hear the original Sanskrit. These are words spoken on a battlefield 5,000 years ago, not to comfort, but to awaken. Words that have outlasted every empire, every tragedy, and every doubt the human heart has ever known. From the Bhagavad Gita Chapter 2, verses 23 through 30. Nayanam chindanti shastrani, nayanam dahati pavaka, na chainam kledayantyapo, na shoshayati maruta, अच्छेद्यो यमदाह्योयम, अक्लेद्यो अशोष्य एवच, नित्यः सर्वगतः, स्थाणुरचलोयम सनातन, अव्यक्तो यमचिन्त्योयम, विकार्यो यमुच्यते, तस्मादेवं विदित्वैनं नानुशोचितुमर्हसि। अथ चैनं नित्यजातं, नित्यं वा मन्यसे मृतं, तथापि त्वं महाबाहो नैवं शोचितुमर्हसि। जातस्य हि ध्रुवो मृत्युर्ध्रुवं, जन्ममृतस्य च, तस्माद् परिहार्यर्थे न त्वं शोचितुमर्हसि। अव्यक्तादीनि भूतानि व्यक्तमध्यानि भारत, अव्यक्तनिधनान्येव तत्र का परिदेवना। आश्चर्यवत् पश्यति कश्चिदेन, माश्चर्यवद् वदति तथैव चान्य आश्चर्यवच्चै नमन्य शृणोति श्रुत्वाप्येनं वेद न चैव कश्चित् देहि नित्यमवध्योऽयं देहे सर्वस्य भारत तस्मात् सर्वाणि भूतानि न त्वं शोचितुमर्हसि. Here is what these sacred words mean. Weapons cannot cut the soul, fire cannot burn it, water cannot make it wet, wind cannot dry it, it cannot be broken, it cannot be burned, it cannot be dissolved, it cannot be withered. It is eternal, present everywhere, unchanging, immovable, and ancient beyond the reach of time itself. It is unmanifest, beyond what the senses can perceive. It is inconceivable, beyond what the mind can grasp. It is immutable. It does not change. It does not waver. Knowing this, you should not grieve. But even if you believe the soul is constantly born and constantly dies, even then you should not grieve. Because for that which is born, death is certain, and for that which has died, rebirth is certain. Why mourn what cannot be avoided? All beings are unmanifest before birth. They become manifest for a brief time in the middle, this life, this visible flicker, and they return to the unmanifest after death. So what truly is there to lament? Some look upon the soul and are filled with wonder. Some speak of it and are filled with wonder. Some hear of it and are struck with awe. And yet, even after hearing, almost no one truly comprehends it. The soul that dwells in every body is eternal and can never be slain. Therefore, you should not grieve for any living being. 5,000 years ago, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, a warrior named Arjuna stood paralyzed by the same invisible force that had pinned Neil to that apartment floor. Arjuna, the greatest archer of his age, stood between two massive armies in his war chariot. And when he looked across the field, he didn't see enemies. He saw his grandfather, who had held him as a boy, his beloved teacher, who had made him who he was, his cousins, who had wrestled with him in the palace courtyards. And he broke. His legendary bow slipped from his fingers, his body trembled, his mouth went dry, and he said to his guide, his charioteer, words that could have come from Neil's own lips. I cannot do this. I would rather die unarmed on this battlefield than carry this pain forward. Does that sound familiar? That desperate feeling of, I cannot carry one more thing. That wish to simply stop existing. Not out of weakness, but because the weight seems specifically engineered to crush you. And it was in that exact moment, Arjuna's lowest, darkest moment, that these 8 verses were spoken, not as gentle comfort, not as distant philosophy, as direct, urgent, unshakable truth. The soul was never born, it will never die. It does not burn when the body burns. It does not drown when the body drowns. It is the one thing in this entire universe that is completely, permanently, utterly beyond harm. Arjuna was not being told to stop feeling. He was being told to see clearly, through the smoke and the tears, what was actually real. The thing he was so terrified of losing in his loved ones, in himself, was the one thing that could never be lost. That is exactly what Neil needed to hear. Neil did not transform that Sunday afternoon. Let's not pretend he did. He didn't stand up, throw open the curtains, and begin some triumphant new chapter. That's not how real people heal. That's not how grief actually works. But something happened. A crack appeared, not in him, but in the wall he had spent 8 months building around himself. He read those verses that night, then again the next morning, and again 3 days later. He didn't fully understand them, but something in the rhythm of those ancient words spoke directly to the stubborn thing inside him, that thing that had refused to die, the thing he had been trying to silence. The guilt didn't disappear. He still heard "take a cab" in his half-sleep, in the shower, in every quiet moment. But slowly, over weeks, then months, a new thought began to sit beside the guilt. Not replacing it, just sitting beside it, quietly, patiently. What if Tara, the real Tara, not her body, not her voice on that phone call, but the thing that made her Tara, what if that was never in the car that night? What if the part of her that laughed too loud at her own jokes, that sang ragas slightly off-key just to watch Kamala Auntie's left eye twitch, that called him Neel Bhaiya in that exact tone no one else on earth could replicate? What if that was something no accident on any road could ever reach? He didn't know if he fully believed it, not with the rational mind that had built software architectures and color-coded 5-year plans. But he felt it. In the same place where the pain lived, something else was living too. Something that had been there before Tara died, before the job, before the marriage, before any of it. He started going for walks, not because a self-help book told him to, but because the apartment had become too small for the new thought growing inside him. He needed sky above him, open space, room for something he couldn't yet name, something that weapons could not cut, that fire could not burn, that water could not wet, that wind could not wither. He wasn't healed, but for the first time in 8 months, he had stopped trying to destroy the part of himself that wouldn't break. And that was the beginning. Now let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. You keep surviving things you were sure would destroy you, and that confuses you more than it comforts you. Every morning feels like reassembling pieces of a life that no longer looks like yours. People around you keep saying time heals, but the clock keeps running and you're still carrying the same invisible weight. Deep inside, there's a voice that refuses to let you quit, and you can't decide whether to thank it or resent it. If even one of those landed, these verses did not find you by accident today. Here is your Gita journal question for today. If the deepest part of you has never actually been damaged by anything that has happened to you, then who have you been grieving for all this time? Yourself, or a version of yourself that was never the real you? Sit with that, write it down, and if you're willing, share your reflection in the comments below. You might be the reason someone else finally understands what they could never put into words. And remember this, every storm you've ever survived left wreckage everywhere you looked, but not once did it touch the sky. You are not the wreckage, you are the sky.